Yo guys, what is up? Moxie here with a Borderlands 4 video. And today I finally get to share with y'all my first impressions and kind of an overview of my time playing Borderlands 4. Now, I was flown out by 2K. They paid for my hotel and my travel to come and play Borderlands 4. This video is sponsored by them. However, they're not requiring me to say anything about the game. They just want me to say my honest first impressions, and that's what I'm going to be doing with y'all. So I hope you guys enjoy the breakdown. Let's get right into it. So let's start with what I got to play, and then we'll get into some more of the specifics. So the day started with a presentation where they caught everyone up to speed about what they're doing differently with Borderlands 4 and some of the key standout features. Now, most of these I knew or had covered in a previous video, but there were some things that were pretty interesting that they shared with us. The first is that the cast of characters in this game is mainly new characters. There are some returning faces, but they're really going to be building up new relationships and stories in this game. Next, they said that you can see the Timekeeper in his tower for, like, most of the game. He's going to be this constant, like, threat and presence watching your, like, every move. They also said that the humor in this game is going to be much darker and drier. They pointed out the shortcomings of Borderlands 3's humor and that it didn't land for many people, and they wanted to like really change up the humor style for this game. They also said that this is going to be the most detailed game yet. An example of that is there are 4 times the amount of polygons in weapons compared to Borderlands 3, which is pretty insane. And then after the presentation, those were some of the biggest notes, we got into our play sessions. These gameplay sessions lasted an hour and a half, so not very long at all. But they set us out on a level 5 character. At this session, we were able to play Vex or Rafa. I spent most of my time on Rafa because he was the character that I knew the least about at the time. And we kind of got to go explore the open world of the like first biome of the game, do some story quests, do some open world quests, kind of explore. It was pretty much up to us what we wanted to focus on. But once again, we were only level 5 for that. So, you know, pretty limited skill tree build options type deal. And then after that 90-minute session, they gave us 45 minutes to go play a vault mission. I don't know what vault mission this was, if there's like an order to them, but we were level 20. They gave us a set skill tree with set gear, and we were able to go do that vault and then play it on both Vex and Rafa and play it as many times as we want in that like 45 minutes. And I also got to interview Graham Timmons, who's the creative director of the game after all of that. And then we head out for the afternoon. Now, I'm going to be making a lot of videos about my time playing this. This is going to be more kind of overview first impressions, but I'm going to have separate videos that just deep dive into all of the tiny little details of the skill tree. I'm going to have a video dedicated specifically to my interview with Graham Timmons, where I asked a lot of my most burning questions, and so much more. So just note that this is the very start of my content that's going to be focused on Borderlands 4 of the time I actually got to play here, and this is going to be kind of the most like overview-like. So my first like 10 to 15 minutes that I spent were basically just looking at Rafa's skill tree. Now Rafa's Vault Hunter trait, these are like kind of like new to Borderlands 4. Basically they're like an inherent passive that the different characters get. For example, Vex, whatever weapon she's holding, her action skills will deal that elemental damage of that weapon. And Rafa's trait is called Overdrive. Whenever Rafa activates an action skill, he enters Overdrive, and then while his action skill is active, Overdrive's duration does not decrease. So basically, as long as your action skill is up, you have Overdrive, and then when your action skill ends, you get to keep Overdrive for like 12 seconds. And this gives you a damage increase and a 25% movement speed increase. So Rafa's action skill, while he's up, he is very fast. And such a fast movement speed buff from literally like level 2 is pretty powerful. Rafa's first action skill is called Arc Knives. This is the one that Gearbox started us out on, and this basically puts you into a like melee stance, and you swing your blades around that deal melee damage, and they mark enemies, and enemies that are marked take increased damage. Then kind of zeros like death mark basically is what you're going to be doing with your melee damage. And then while you're in the Arc Knives mode, you actually have different kind of attacks. So your right trigger on controller or your like main click just does your melee attack. Your left trigger does a dash that did a ton of damage. And this is also considered melee damage. Like, it wasn't action skill damage, it was melee damage, which, you know, obviously has some pretty interesting implications for builds. And then your left bumper was unleashing your Blade Fury, which does shock damage to all marked targets and ends the skill. So this is something that you would click after, or like right when your action skill was about to end. So kind of the flow of it is you dash to enemies, melee, 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 dash through them because the dash did a ton of damage. It was on a short cooldown. You would dash around, and then once you had hit everything, if there were some enemies that you hadn't killed yet, you would hit your LB to detonate basically all of the enemies around you. Now, this had a base duration of 32 seconds, so you're up for a long time. With 48-second cooldown, you could mark enemies, 4 enemies at a time, basically, or you could only have 4 enemies marked, and then you would get +6 damage per mark. So I think this was something that was like stacking. Basically, if you're hitting an enemy multiple times, you could stack marks on them to get more damage on them. And then, you know, there was a bunch of augments for this. But just as like a base, one thing I wanted to point out is these action skills have a lot going on for them before you even get into the augments, right? Like, this is already a lot of things going on for a single action skill, and that was a theme that I noticed throughout, is all of the action skills have a lot of different layers to them, and that is before you can massively change them with your augments. Rafa's next action skill was Apophis Lance. This is the one that I spent the least amount of time with just because I tried it and it didn't feel that great to me, to be honest with you. But basically, this allows you to equip an offhand arm cannon that while you have this arm cannon, you get less gun handling, but it allows you to fire a shock ordnance blast. Ordnance is this new like label of damage that's like grenade launchers and stuff. And any unused charges when Apophis Lance ends are converted to cooldown, and then you'd press the button to basically fire out and consume a charge, or hold it for extra like projectile size and projectile speed at the cost of more charges. And you would kind of like shoot this basically like lobbed shock kind of grenade explosion. And this one was not something that I messed around with too much, basically because when I only had a limited amount of time to use it. When I was using it, I would basically like hold it down, shoot it, and then it was gone. And like if you missed, and then you had to wait, an 18-second cooldown. So this one I didn't love, but it was also the one that like I didn't really get to mess around with that much. But this kind of leans in to Rafa's whole tree that I saw a big focus on, which was ordnance damage. Rafa is a character, this is something we've been wondering, is they've moved grenades and rocket launchers into this new category of ordnance where they're not going to be like competing with like gun slots, basically. And ordnance is so much more than just your grenade slot and your rocket launcher slot, you know what I mean? It's this kind of whole new archetype that you can build around where like Rafa can use his action skill that just does ordnance damage. And then you could kind of get a build around this lance, but you could also build around your grenades and your rocket launchers, which did feel really impactful when you did pull them out. I actually really like what they're doing with ordnance, but that was kind of his lance skill. And Rafa's last action skill, and my personal favorite, were these Peacebreaker cannons. These are kind of a bit like Zane's shoulder-mounted cannon, but if Zane's shoulder-mounted cannon auto-fired for you at any enemy that you're aiming at. These things fire at base kinetic damage, and anything that you place your crosshair at during the action skill, these turrets will fire at, and they are up for 18 seconds, and then they just deal a bunch of damage to anything you're aiming at, and there's a lot of different cool augments to make these things even more powerful, or do different things. However, what caught my eye the most about Rafa from the time that I got to check out his trees was he basically seems to have a skill tree that is entirely revolving around ricochets. And ricochets is one of my favorite mechanics. My favorite build of all time in Borderlands 3 was Ricochet Witch. And Rafa has some crazy skills that allows his projectiles that he fires that are indirect projectiles, or as I'm understanding them, ricochets, to deal additional damage. And then has got a bunch of things that give him a chance to have more indirect attacks, and have all of his shots bounce off of walls. So you're getting even more like indirect projectiles. And then he had some things that allow his like indirect projectiles or ricochets to gain lifesteal. He had the ability to make his indirect projectiles or ricochets deal bonus fire damage. And what's even the most crazy part about it is he had a capstone skill, not like an actual capstone, but like one of the ones at the end of his tree called lateral plinking that gives his ricochets a chance to ricochet. His indirect projectiles have a chance to ricochet. So I'm thinking Rafa with like a Jacobs, or, you know, it doesn't even need to be a Jacobs in this game. It could be any weapon that has a Jacobs part. You could do like a full ricochet build with, and that was sounding freaking incredible to me. So yeah, Rafa is definitely gaining some points on my list on what character I'm going to be playing on launch. He was looking real nice. Now, there has been a lot more information about Vex, but I do want to call out some of the things that really caught my eye in her skill tree as well. And one of the first ones was Bloodletter. As some of you may know, I love status effect builds. That's like the #1 build archetype that I enjoy in most games. And Vex, in her like at level 6, basically, you get the ability for Bloodletter. Vex has a lot of like kinetic damage attuning, or like synergies with kinetic weapons. And one of those is that her gun and skill critical hits have a chance to apply bleed, causing kinetic status effect damage over time, which is 9% of your gun damage per second, but you can stack up 20 stacks of bleed. So unlike, you know, like fire or shock or things like that, where it's like one status effect, bleed is something that you can stack up a bunch of. And my brain was racing with like, oh my god, what if I get like a 25 stack or 25 pellet like Jacob shotgun and just like boom, headshot, and a ton of bleed damage stacks up. There's some really interesting things that Vex is going to be able to do. Vex also had some really interesting synergies, and to kind of give you like an idea of how Vex is going to play, like I would relate her the most to like a warlock character. She has some things that we've never seen in a Borderlands game, like she can apply curses to enemies and other things to kind of like piggyback off of the last status effect thing that I mentioned. I noticed this skill, Prismatic Ichor, where Vex and her minions, whenever they apply a status effect, you apply another random elemental status effect. So you could use your like kinetic gun to bleed enemies, but if you bleed enemies, you could apply like shock and burn and stuff like that. So you could still get elemental damage effects via, you know, kinetic weapons, which is kind of crazy. And then you get like keen suffering, so that all of your status effect damage has a chance to critically hit. So then now your bleeds are critting, all of your elemental status effects are critting. And with Vex's capstone in her 4th tree, whenever you're spawning your like clones or your specters or reapers, you can spawn a Grim Reaper, which deals status effect damage and restores health to you. Vex had a lot of tools, it seemed like, for survivability, a lot of synergies with lifesteal, and a lot of ways to get health. She was definitely like more tanky feeling than when my time with playing Rafa. Now let's get into the actual gameplay. And if you played Borderlands 3, the gameplay is like Borderlands 3, but if Borderlands 3 was a lot faster feeling. The movement that they've added to the game is kind of insane. You can just kind of double jump, dash into a slide, into a grappling hook, and you can chain all of these things together to feel really fluid. The gunplay feels like, you know, a slight improvement from Borderlands 3's gunplay, and the enemy variety that I was fighting against felt new. There's new enemies that bring new challenges, and we'll talk about bosses in a second. But this is where some of my first concerns started to arise, is when I started to play gameplay. And the first was, you know, I have classically played Borderlands 3 on controller. Since then, I've basically moved back to mouse and keyboard for most games. But I tried Borderlands 4 on mouse and keyboard and controller, and maybe it was just the like amount of time that I got to play, which was very short. I didn't get to like set up all my settings, but I was having a real hard time getting a sensitivity that felt good. I kept having to like tweak my sensitivity on both mouse and keyboard and controller because I went back and forth between the two, and something just felt a little off there. I don't know what it was. Maybe you just need more time in the game to really get my sensitivities down, but just I did notice that like I was having a little bit more trouble just aiming, which I, you know, didn't feel at all when I was playing Borderlands 3. So I just wanted to call that out. The other thing that I didn't like about particularly playing controller on this game is in Borderlands 3, you had a setting where you could change the controller binds to be like classic Borderlands binds, where you could use the D-pad to select what weapon you wanted to use. So if you pressed up on the D-pad, you could then, get the weapon that was in the top slot. If you press down, you get the weapon in the bottom slot. With all of their changes to be able to summon a vehicle out in the world, with the button for the rep kit and everything, they do not have the ability to have your keybinds on controller to do the like classic Borderlands wheel where you can choose what weapon you want to select. So, now you have to either cycle through the weapons, or you can kind of hold the weapon swap to pull up a weapon wheel and then go and click up or click down to get the weapon that you want. Not the biggest deal, but as a controller player, I was kind of sad to see that like classic Borderlands controller layout where you can just hit the D-pad to instantly swap to exactly the weapon that I want to be gone. The other gameplay issue that I was having was actually with the compass. Now, there's been kind of a tirade on Twitter, mainly led by Mr. Killer6, about the dismissal of the minimap, which has been a feature in Borderlands 2 and Borderlands 3, with the introduction of the compass that was in Borderlands 1. And I do have to say that I was entirely on Team Compass leading up to getting to actually play the game. And maybe it's just something that I'll learn and get more used to as I play more. But I was finding myself kind of struggling to use the compass. And that was mainly because a lot of the times when you would point in a direction, the compass would point at 8 different icons all at the same time. And it was kind of difficult to understand, then navigate to which one you wanted to get to. So kind of just showing up on screen right now, you can see on my compass, there's 4 different icons all in the exact same kind of direction, and they're all overlapping. And I asked Gearbox specifically, hey, can I control what pops up on my compass so that if I don't care about vaults anymore, I don't have to see them on the compass bar? And they said that it's not an option. So, maybe it's something that they can add for launch. But I was, having a little bit of difficulty navigating not only out in the world with the compass, but also I was finding myself just looking at the top bar when an enemy was shooting at me from behind, because there were sometimes it was hard to I was looking at new enemies and new allies. It was hard to differentiate what was an enemy and what was an ally. A lot of times I was just looking up at the compass, trying to line up my little center dot in the compass where an enemy was, to kind of pinpoint where I should be aiming and where I should be shooting. Just a small little detail, but, I want to give you guys my honest impressions, and that was one of them. The next thing to mention is, enemy scaling out in the open world, and that was something that was a big question going into this, is I really wanted to know, can I go anywhere in this world and fight enemies my level? If I finish the game and then I go back to the starting area, are enemies going to be level 5 and invalidate all of that open world content? How are they going to make sure that the open world is interesting and engaging? And what they've gone with is kind of this semi-dynamic level scaling, where basically when you get into the world, the starting area is going to have low-level enemies, and, areas with, cooler loot and stuff like that might have higher-level enemies, but it's not like you can go from one end of the map to the other and fight enemies your level. Only, the starting beginner areas are going to have low-level enemies, and if you come back to that low-level area at the end of the game, let's say you're level 50, those enemies will actually scale up in level, but they're never going to be at your level exactly, but loot should still drop at your level, if that makes sense. So with the enemies that I'm fighting at level 5 right now, if I came back to here at the end of the game, as they explained it to me, these enemies would be level 45-ish, but they should still be giving me on-level loot, for example. Basically, they want it so that the world is engaging, that you're going to be, challenged. If you want to go out and explore and find cool stuff, you're going to be fighting more challenging enemies. I found enemies that were a higher level than me immediately were very noticeably more difficult, but that you can kind of, curate your difficulty. If you want to go out and go to those higher level areas, if you've got a good build, you can fight those more challenging enemies and get some more rewarding stuff, or you can kind of stay in the main mission area and do those main missions. And it's a non-linear story, is also something that's also going to be going on. There was multiple kind of options to engage with what story quest I kind of wanted to do next in this world. And I thought all of that was really good. I didn't really know what I wanted from that going into it, but I think the system that they've gone with is going to be, hopefully, really good, and it sounds like it's going to be an engaging open world to explore. Speaking of engaging open world, after I had finished my, main 90-minute session and had done the vault a few times, I jumped back into my, level 7 character, and one of the devs, Graham Timmons, who is sitting next to me, was like, just go out and explore, go see what you find. And that's exactly what I did. I hopped on my bike, and one of the really cool things about this game is the, quest structure that they seem to be going with, is there's going to be a lot of stuff that just pops up. Things that you're not actually seeking out, but things that are going to happen in the open world that will drive your attention elsewhere or divert your attention to go do something that maybe you didn't think you were going to be going to do. And I found this in a huge example when I was just driving around. I picked a random direction and I started going that way. And while I was driving, a burning ship started flying through the sky. And I could obviously tell that, it looked like it was going to crash somewhere. And as I was driving, I saw it drop a care package as it was flying. And so I kind of went and followed the smoke trail from where the ship went down. And that's what ended me in a huge kind of salvage wreck mission. And sure enough, when I got to the ship wreckage, there was a whole mission to do there. And then there was another mission that kind of led into this other mission. And I didn't plan on going to do this, but it got me in this crazy quest chain that I ended up exploring this whole underground area, because where the ship had crashed, there was a drilling site, and after I had basically turned off the drills, I was able to go underneath where the drills had been mining and find a secret camp infested with a bunch of enemies and get a bunch of cool loot. And this is just one example. Obviously, I only got to play the open world for about 2 hours, but it does seem like not only is there going to be your main quest structure, but there's also going to be a lot of dynamic events happening in the open world, such as the world bosses, which I personally did not get to experience, but other players in my play session did. And I'm just so excited to explore this world. I feel like I got to see basically none of it in my time playing. It genuinely seems massive. Obviously, I don't really have an idea of or how to tell you how big it is. I don't really have anything to compare it to because I only saw a little bit of the first section. But I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about the open world section of Borderlands. And it seems like it's going to be really cool. Now, there is one caveat that I do want to point out, and we'll see how it plays. But for example, my first time playing Elden Ring, the open world was crazy, and I went and explored everything. And there were so many cool things to find. But then my third playthrough of a game like Elden Ring, I knew where what I cared about was, and I knew what I didn't care about was. And so I just went and explored the things I cared about. I just went to go do the things that I knew I was going to get an upgrade or get a good weapon from. So we'll see how that works in Borderlands 4. My only concern with the open world is kind of that, is that once you know where everything is and once you know what activities are good and what activities are not, then maybe you're not exploring the open world as much. You're just beelining it to whatever is important. And so hopefully that is not the case, but it is a concern that kind of crossed my mind after I was done playing. Guys, that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. You'll know that there's some aspects of the game that I didn't get to talk to about, such as the whole licensed part system and all the different random roles that you can be getting on gear. I kind of want to save that for a separate video. But overall, from my time playing, I left wanting to play more, which, is always a good sign, and even more excited for the future of Borderlands. I'm really glad that the devs are just taking kind of so many steps and risks and expanding on the Borderlands formula for this game. There's just no way that you can just say that this is Borderlands 3.5. There's genuinely so many things that they're doing completely different than we've seen in any Borderlands game, and I think that's really exciting. Now, I do want to say that my opinions in this video are based off of 2.5 hours of playtime. I have over 5,000 hours in Borderlands 3, and my opinions from playing my first 2 hours of Borderlands 3 are very different than my, after playing 5,000 hours of the game. So obviously all of those things and opinions are subject to change, but I kind of wanted to just cover my first impressions of the game and the things that I saw that were really exciting to me. So yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for an F-ton more coverage of Borderlands 4. We have a lot to talk about. Thanks again to 2K for sponsoring this video and flying me out to play Borderlands 4. Stay tuned for a bunch more videos. I will also be playing Borderlands 4 live in the next coming days on stream, so you can check that out. Also, if you are interested in pre-ordering Borderlands, you can find a link in the description to do so. All right, guys, take care. Peace.